The scream cleaved the attic silence, thin as glass, and Clara flinched as dust spiraled in the beam of her phone. She whispered, "I heard that, didn't I?" And the rafters answered with a cold breath. The storm pressed against the roof like a held breath. She tugged a moth-eaten top, and wood rasped against wood. "Just boxes," Clara said, "just weight and wind." A small trunk lurked in the eaves, iron latch scabbed with rust. The air smelled of cedar and something sweet like old perfume. She knelt, heart cracking its own code, and lifted the lid. Porcelain gleamed, a doll with glass eyes and a stitched mouth. "You were waiting," Clara said, and the house seemed to lean closer to listen. Downstairs, the house felt older, as if the attic had bent time and let it spill through the floorboards. Clara set the doll on the hallway table and wiped her palms on her jeans. "I knew out. You're just porcelain," Clara said, "and I'm jumpy from the storm." The grandfather clock muttered 6 slow tones, each one bruising the quiet. In the kitchen, pipes sighed like someone almost speaking. She made tea for the ritual of warmth, not the taste. Daniel called, and she answered with a thin laugh. Daniel said, "You need sleep, not relics." Clara said, "It screamed before I touched the trunk." The kettle hissed in her silence, and the lights dimmed, as if the house had heard its own name. Sleep dodged her like a guilty thought. Clara carried the doll to the guest room, because leaving it alone felt worse than keeping it near. "Stay put," Clara said, and the door hinge replied with a soft, aching note. She tucked the doll into a chair, ribbon straight, gaze averted from the bed. Daniel texted a joke about haunted thrift stores, and she typed, then erased. The storm slowed, but the air kept its grave chill. In the dark, the fridge coughed, and the house settled with bone sounds. Clara said, "I'm fine," and flinched at her own voice. Somewhere inside the walls, a lullaby began that no one living knew. The lullaby threaded through the plaster like a memory smelling of lilac and dust. Clara sat up, heart doing embroidery on her ribs. "No music box," Clara said, "no batteries, no reason." She stepped to the chair and found the doll turned a few degrees toward the door. The ribbon lay crooked, as if small hands had fussed with it. Daniel said, "Drafts make doors, not songs," and the call crackled into static. She tasted iron, old and thin. Clara lifted the doll and felt a swing in the air, like a pendulum she had set moving without touching. The lullaby paused, then resumed, softer, closer, almost inside her ear. Clara set the doll back in the chair and pressed the ribbon flat with 2 careful strokes. "No more," Clara said, "not tonight." The house listened, and the lullaby went still. She closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood until her breath fogged it. A whisper threaded through the gap like cold silk. It formed her name, soft and pleased. Daniel said, "You're scaring yourself through a message she did not open." Clara counted to 10, then to 50. Beyond the door, a tiny click sounded, like a porcelain neck turning to follow. She said, "I heard you," and the clock downstairs swallowed the reply. Morning smeared a thin gray over the town, and the house woke like an old cat. Clara wrapped herself in a cardigan that still smelled of a lost Sunday. Daniel said, "Open the windows and let the storm out." She opened one, and the sash groaned like a warning. The doll stared from the guest chair with a calm that felt cruel. Clara said, "You are staying where I can see you." The clock ticked with surgical patience. Tea steamed, then cooled untouched. Grief rose, quick and sour, and she swallowed it like medicine. She needed safety, but the house asked different questions. Daniel said, "Come by later, and we will inventory the weird." By noon, the house breathed easier, yet the quiet felt practiced. Clara carried the doll to the hallway table like a treaty. Daniel said, "If it moves again, you call me first." She placed a notebook beside it and drew a neat grid for times and places. The pen scratched like a tiny insect. "Facts," Clara said, "not fear." A soft drag crossed the ceiling, and both of them froze. Daniel said, "Pipes." The sound repeated, slower, deliberate, as if matching their pulses. Clara wrote, attic step, 2 beats, pause. The doll's painted mouth smiled the same small, merciless smile. Daniel unpacked a toolbox like a secular priest. He set motion senses and laughed at himself. Daniel said, if this catches a mouse, I'm billing you. Clara said, if it sings, you are staying the night. He placed a camera facing the guest chair and checked the angle twice. The lens blinked like a patient eye. Clara held the doll and felt a cold seam through its dress. Something stitched tight around something else. Daniel said, we need baselines, not legends. The house answered with a low tremor that rattled a glass. Clara wrote, vibration, unsourced, 1203, not wind. They walked to the corner shop for air and coffee that tasted like burnt sugar. Evelyn stood near the bulletin board, reading the dead notices as if they might reply. Evelyn said, attics keep accounts. Clara blinked, unsure if she had misheard. Daniel said, she means dust and bats. Evelyn's eyes held a tired kindness edged with iron. She slid a card across the counter with a number. Evelyn said, some heirlooms were never gifts. Clara felt heat and cold at once, like a fever choosing sides. The bell over the door chimed a sour note. Outside, the sky lowered its brow. At dusk they returned, and the house waited with lamplit politeness. Clara placed the card by the notebook, then faced the guest room. Daniel said, one night of data, then we reassess. The camera's red dot glowed like a small heartbeat. Clara said, if it moves, we will know. And if it sings, we will listen. The air cooled, as if the house drew breath to speak. Floorboards ticked, slow and even, like a metronome learning a hymn. Daniel said, you are safe, and sounded unsure. Clara closed the door and set her shoulder against it. In the silence, the lullaby began at the exact moment the recording started. The recording blinked through the night, its quiet red dot steady as a heart. At 3 in the morning, Clara woke to a sound like footsteps moving behind the walls. Daniel stirred on the couch muttering, pipes again. Clara whispered, too heavy for pipes. The doll remained in the chair, but its head tilted just slightly toward the door. Clara's notebook recorded time and sound. The lullaby, faint and cracked, came through the plaster. She pressed her ear to the wall and heard a child's hum sync with her pulse. Daniel muttered, dreaming awake, but her hand trembled as she wrote, footsteps, wall, 3-7. By dawn, Clara and Daniel reviewed the footage. The doll did not shift, yet the audio carried steady footsteps pacing the room. Daniel said, glitches and echoes. Clara pointed at the spectrogram, a faint child's hum repeating under the noise. That's not a glitch, Clara said. That's a voice. Daniel's jaw worked as he scrolled frame by frame. The doll's eyes reflected the camera red, but once, just once, they caught something brighter, like lightning no one else saw. Daniel said, coincidence? Clara whispered, or witness? The silence between them had weight, thick as the house's beams. That night Clara dreamt she was walking through the attic, but the floor was water and the rafters bent like ribs. A small girl's silhouette, hair dripping dark, stood in the corner. Clara said, who are you? The child turned, and her mouth was sewn shut with red thread. Clara woke, gasping, and the doll sat on the chair, tilted again. Daniel rubbed his eyes, saying, bad dreams, nothing more. Clara touched the doll's ribbon and felt dampness, cool as river water. She whispered, she was up there with me. The attic door thudded softly, as if nodding. The attic stairs groaned when Clara pulled the cord, though no one had touched them. Daniel followed, muttering, we log it, that's all. The air smelled sharp, metallic. Dust spiraled in beams of flashlights. Clara found scratches along the doorframe, thin and clawed, like a child dragging nails. Daniel said, rats. Clara whispered, no rat writes names. Faint letters spelled Lila in the wood, etched shallow but deliberate. Her breath stuttered, and the flashlight wavered. Daniel touched the letters, his expression caught between disbelief and fear. He said, "We don't tell anyone yet." Back in the hallway, Clara gripped the doll like a fragile weapon. The ribbon had twisted into a knot she had not tied. Daniel said, "We should burn it." Clara shook her head, whispering, "That's what it wants." The grandfather clock struck once, though it was not the hour. The sound vibrated in her chest. Clara pressed the doll to her side, teeth clenched against a sob. Daniel stood stiff, unwilling to touch it, unwilling to leave it. He said, "Then it stays, but under watch." Clara whispered, "She's already awake," and the house sighed like something settling deeper into the walls. The morning dragged pale light into the parlor, turning the wallpaper the color of bruises. Clara laid the doll on the table beside Evelyn's card. Daniel said, "We can still walk away from this." Clara whispered, "It's already inside." The silence pressed like a weight, filling her chest. She dialed Evelyn's number, and each ring felt like a heartbeat. Evelyn answered with a calm hush and said, "You saw the name." Clara nodded even though no one could see. Daniel muttered, "This is ridiculous." Evelyn's voice sharpened, "Do not mock her. Lila was bound to that house long before you." That afternoon, Clara and Daniel met Evelyn in her bookshop, where the air smelled of ink and smoke. Shelves towered like guardians. Evelyn spread faded records across a table. Evelyn said, "Your blood is in these pages." Clara traced a black and white photo of a girl with dark hair and a stitched doll. Daniel muttered, "Coincidences and hysteria." Evelyn's eyes pinned him still. "The house remembers bargains. Your family sealed her in porcelain, not earth." Clara's hand shook as she whispered, "Lila Hart." Evelyn nodded, her face unreadable, and said, "The debt was never paid." Evelyn guided Clara to a locked cabinet. Inside lay a leather-bound journal brittle with age. Evelyn said, "Your great-grandmother wrote of the ritual, binding a restless child in porcelain." Clara read aloud, "She sings when the storm comes, she scratches when ignored." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Daniel whispered, "They believed it worked." Evelyn replied, "It did, until someone opened the trunk." Clara closed the journal, her breath trembling. She said, "She wants out." Evelyn's lips tightened. She never stopped wanting. As they left the shop, evening clouds folded heavy across the sky. Evelyn said, "Do not sleep near the doll again. The attic is her ground." Clara asked, "How do we end it?" Evelyn said nothing, only pressed a key into Clara's palm. Daniel frowned. "Keys solve nothing." Evelyn answered, "This one unlocks what your family sealed." Clara felt the cold iron dig into her skin. The town around them seemed to lean closer, windows dark, streets narrow. A gust blew through, carrying a child's faint hum. Daniel muttered, "I heard that," and for once he didn't deny it. Back home, Clara climbed the attic stairs with the iron key biting her palm. Daniel followed, flashlight beam shaking in his hand. The trunk stood open, lace spilling like breath. Clara said it was never supposed to be opened. Daniel whispered, "Then close it." She crouched and saw beneath the doll's resting place a false bottom, lined with sigils burned into the wood. Her breath caught as whispers bled from the seams. "Eh?" Evelyn's words echoed. She never stopped wanting. Clara pressed the key against the carvings, and the house groaned as if something deep inside had woken. The attic air thickened, warm as breath against Clara's neck. The iron key vibrated in her palm as the sigils flared faintly. Daniel whispered, "It's reacting." Clara said, "No, it's remembering." The doll's porcelain cheek cracked wider, spiderweb lines splitting under the bulb. A thin hum rose from the false bottom, a child's voice struggling through stitches. Clara whispered, "Lila." The sound sharpened into a wail that rattled the rafters. Daniel dropped his flashlight, muttering, "This is wrong. This is all wrong." Clara pressed harder, heart hammering, and the house shook with a deep, hungry groan. The false bottom popped loose, revealing a cavity lined with dark cloth and brittle hair. Inside lay bones small enough for a child's palm. Clara recoiled, gasping. She's here. Daniel whispered. They buried her inside the doll. The air stank of damp earth, though no soil lay in sight. A lullaby trickled through the rafters, broken, stitched together by sobs. Clara touched the bones and felt cold seep up her arm like water rising. Daniel's face drained of color as he said, "We unleashed her." Clara whispered, "No, we only reminded her." The bulbs snapped off, leaving them in heavy dark. In the dark, Clara whispered, "She was family." Daniel muttered, "This isn't family, it's a curse." The attic door slammed shut with a bang that shook dust loose. A child's whisper crept along the rafters, soft and delighted. "Clara!" Her throat tightened, and she clutched the doll to her chest. The porcelain felt warm, pulsing faintly. Daniel said, "Drop it," but her hands would not release. The whisper grew, weaving through her bones, chanting Lila like a prayer. Clara gasped. She was betrayed. The air trembled, and the flashlight beam caught letters scratched deeper into the trunkwood. Heart. The doll's mouth split slightly, seemed tearing to reveal darkness within. A hiss slithered into the room, both lullaby and growl. Clara cried, "She's still inside." Daniel grabbed the iron key, shouting, "Then let's end it." He drove it against the trunk's false bottom, and sparks burst like fireflies. The whisper turned to a scream that shredded the air, louder than thunder. Clara fell to her knees, clutching her ears, eyes wet. The scream twisted into laughter, brittle and cruel. Daniel dropped the key, his hand blistered. Clara whispered, "We only broke her chains." The attic quieted, but the silence was wrong, full, and waiting. The doll now sat upright on its own, head tilted in triumph. Clara whispered, "She's free." Daniel's voice broke. "Then what's in the house with us now?" Shadows thickened between the rafters, coiling like smoke. Clara stared at the bones and felt guilt burn through her ribs. She whispered, "She was a child." The shadow above them whispered back, "She still is." Daniel grabbed Clara's arm, urging, "We leave now." But the attic door would not open. The house had chosen, and the game had only begun. The attic pulsed like a lung, every beam flexing with hidden breath. Clara gripped the iron key, her skin raw where it burned. Daniel whispered, "We can fight this." The doll's cracked lips widened, spilling a sound both hymn and scream. Clara said, "It's not her fault. It's what's inside." The shadows thickened until the bulb above bent low, almost torn from its wire. Evelyn's warning echoed in her mind, "The attic is her ground." Clara crouched over the sigils, whispering a prayer she didn't believe. Daniel shouted, "Say her name!" Clara screamed, "Lila Hart!" and the rafters shook. The floorboards warped as though water swelled beneath them. A child's figure coalesced in the corner, hair long, dress torn, eyes hollow but pleading. Clara whispered, "She's still bound." Daniel hissed, "That's no child." The figure tilted its head, humming the lullaby that had plagued Clara's nights. The doll's glass eyes gleamed, reflecting the child's hollow sockets. Clara stepped forward, tears streaking her cheeks. "You were forgotten," she whispered. The figure raised one stitched hand as if reaching for her. The attic roared with sudden wind, scattering dust like ashes. Daniel grabbed Clara's arm, shouting, "Don't touch her!" Clara pressed the key against the doll's chest, and the porcelain hissed as if flesh burned. The apparition screamed, a sound like broken glass. Daniel said, "It's working," but Clara's body shook violently, her breath cut in half. The doll's cracks widened, leaking dark smoke that curled into the rafters. Clara gasped, "She's fighting me." Daniel grabbed the key to help, and both of them were hurled backward as the trunk slammed shut on its own. The attic rattled, nails squealing in beams. Clara whispered, "She doesn't want to leave." The child's voice echoed, "Stay with me." Evelyn's voice rose from nowhere, carried on the storm. "Balance requires an exchange." Clara gasped, "What do I give?" The attic air swelled hot, then freezing, as the doll's head snapped toward her with a sickening crack. Daniel shouted, Don't listen! Clara clutched the doll, pressing her forehead to its porcelain. Take me, not him, she whispered. The air stilled, and the shadow child froze, staring. Daniel grabbed her shoulder, horrified. No, don't! The attic groaned as if approving. The sigils glowed red-hot, pulsing like a heartbeat. Clara closed her eyes and whispered, I won't run anymore. The doll's crack sealed with a hiss, swallowing the smoke back inside. The ghost child faded, her outline unraveling into ash. Clara slumped, the iron key dropping with a dull clang. Daniel caught her, shouting Clara, but her eyes were distant, unfocused. The attic stilled, as if nothing had ever happened. The doll lay motionless in her arms, its painted lips curved faintly, mockingly. Daniel whispered, We ended it, though his voice wavered. Clara blinked, whispering, No, we bargained. The grandfather clock downstairs struck midnight, though it was not yet the hour, and the house answered with silence heavy as stone. Morning light bled pale through the shutters, yet the house felt unchanged, as though the night had been swallowed whole. Clara sat in the parlor, doll still cradled in her lap. Daniel said, We survived, but his voice faltered. Clara whispered, Not without cost. Her skin was clammy, her eyes hollow, fixed on porcelain lips that no longer crack. The silence pressed around them, heavy as chains. Daniel paced, rubbing his blistered hand, muttering, We should leave. Clara touched the doll's hair, whispering, She's bound to me now. The clock struck once, though its hand stood still, and the air froze. Later, Daniel loaded boxes into his car, insisting they abandon the house. Clara lingered in the doorway, the doll perched on her arm like an unwilling child. Daniel said, Come with me, don't look back. Clara whispered, I can't, she won't let me. The wind carried a lullaby only she seemed to hear. Daniel reached for her hand, but she stepped back, eyes shining with something between sorrow and devotion. I'll keep her quiet, Clara said. Daniel's face broke, fury and grief tangled, but he turned away. The car roared to life, leaving Clara in the doorway, the house sighing content. As evening fell, Clara returned to the attic, candle in hand. Shadows trembled across the rafters, yet the air was still. She placed the doll back in its trunk, smoothing the lace as though tucking a child to bed. Sleep now, Clara whispered. I'll sing for you. Her voice cracked as she hummed a lullaby, the same tune that once terrified her. The doll's glass eyes caught the flame, gleaming faintly, as if in approval. The trunk lid closed softly, without her touch. Clara sat against the wall, humming until her voice grew hoarse, the candle burning low. Night thickened, pressing against the windows, as Clara drifted into uneasy sleep in the parlor chair. She dreamt of a child's laughter echoing through endless corridors. Evelyn's voice whispered from nowhere, The debt continues. Clara startled awake, clutching the doll that had returned to her lap without sound. Her breath caught, sharp and cold. She whispered, I put you away. The doll's ribbon now hung neatly tied, though she had left it loose. The clock struck once more, wrong again. Clara buried her face in her hands, tears leaking through her fingers. The house exhaled, long and patient. Near midnight, Clara rose and walked the hall, each step echoing louder than it should. She whispered, I'm here, Lila. The house hummed with quiet satisfaction. She paused at the guest room door, hearing a faint giggle from inside. Her hand shook as she reached for the knob, but the door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, the chair sat empty. The doll rested neatly on the bed, head turned toward the door, smile painted wider. Clara gasped, and the light flickered out. In the dark, the last sound was a whisper close to her ear, Stay forever.